We're here with Senator Andy Manar. The governor has had his first 100 days in office. I don't know if that actually means anything. You know, the axe sort of moves slow over here. You don't get a lot done in 100 days. But being, you know, on the other side of the aisle, you know, I asked him to grade himself. What grade would you give him for his first 100 days?
I think it depends on the topic, Brian. And I say that because there's so much. And I mean, in fairness to the governor, when he took office, there's a mountain of things to do. So I kind of am of the same train of thought as you, that, you know, the 100 days is a good kind of point of reflection. But I think we also have to understand that you know, he's beginning his first term, and the legislature's beginning its session from a very difficult set of circumstances for many reasons. But you know, for example, I give him high marks on what he's proposed with education. I think that's a very good start.
He's talking about changing the funding.
He is, and that's a change from his predecessor.
Also a change for the Republicans. I know you've run up against, you know, partisan, you know, arguments against. I still can't figure it out. I mean, I think what you've laid out makes sense. Certainly, you know, I get that some districts are not going to do as well. But isn't that sort of what he has to do now with the entire state budget? There's so many dollars and there's so many hands out, and this is what you can do.
Yeah, and we have to find balance there. And his efforts on criminal justice reform, I think, are long overdue in the state. We have huge cost drivers in the budget, in the correction system, based on recidivism, and he's tackling that. That was one of the first things that he put forward, which again is a good positive step forward in my mind. You know, the rhetoric has been a bit divisive from my perspective. I chalk that up to as just politics sometimes. But I think all in all, I think we've taken some pretty good steps this spring. We have tremendous steps to, you know, still take between now and May 31st. But I think there's good, and there's some other things that I just frankly don't agree with.
And that's to be expected. You know, the rhetoric gets dialed up on both sides. I mean, you know, we had a head of a union call him Darth Vader last week. I mean, you know, if that's not political, I don't know what is. I tell you, I think he's lobbying the General Assembly maybe more than we've seen in a long while. You know, and I don't know if that reflects on the Democrats or not, but I know he's having get-togethers and people coming to the governor. You know, being in the governor's mansion is just a change.
Well, I'll give you my latest example, not first or probably last, but it would have been 2 Sundays ago. He called and said, "Hey, are you around?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Why don't you come by and let's have a conversation about education funding and the budget?" And so I met him on a Sunday afternoon, and we talked for, I think, almost 2 hours.
Explain to the folks that's rare, right? For at least the last 12 years, it hasn't existed.
It is rare, and that should be said. And that's not my assessment of anyone or anything, but you know, it was clear to me that there's things that we agree on, there's things that we disagree on, but having the back and forth, face-to-face conversations, I think eventually leads to better outcomes. That's how you build trust. That's how you build an understanding of alternative positions, knowing that there's some things I'm just never going to agree with him on. And vice versa. There's things that he's not going to agree with me on, but we lack that today. And I would say that that's a positive thing in my mind.
All right, let's talk about right to work, and let's talk about Decatur, because I don't think that there's any feeling whatsoever from our current mayor or our current council. This is anything they want to touch. I know labor is upset, and I get why they're trying to lobby and make sure that, you know, the governor doesn't get his way. But if the municipalities don't have any interest, I mean, aren't you just kind of barking up a tree? I mean, I don't, because not only would it hurt union jobs, the unions say, it would also hurt local companies. I mean, if you open this up to where a Dunn company in Decatur, who's by all accounts a union shop, even though they wouldn't be counted as a union shop because they pay prevailing wage, all that would do would be open it up to companies in Missouri and Indiana to be able to come into Decatur and outbid them. No one wants to see that.
That's the argument that is being played out in Missouri right now. You know, Missouri is not a right-to-work state, and there's a referendum that's coming up on the ballot, and there's arguments on both sides, as of course is the case everywhere on something like this. But that's the argument that's being played out in Missouri. I ultimately think that we should move on from this issue.
I just don't think there's a stomach for it at the local level.
I don't either. Yeah. And I think the governor has banked his position on right to work based on support at the municipal level and school board level, the county level, local government levels, which I just don't see. I don't see it in my district. I know that there's one community that I represent that has passed a resolution supporting it, and that's Litchfield.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I just don't see the support. I think we got other things.
I do too, and I think it's being used as sort of a political boogeyman to help raise money, and this last mayoral race, which you got involved in, and I had a conversation with you or texted you the day before the election. The unions poured $65,000 into that mayoral campaign, and they didn't get anything for it, and they lost by double digits. But I think it's that fear, and I just think as a community, this is a dead issue. There's bigger things we need to be talking about, whether it's funding in the classroom or it's creation of jobs or getting Decatur back on the right track. But do you sense that there's still that sort of unified effort out there trying?
Yeah, I do. And, I'll tell you what the governor and I talked about this. We talked about it a lot, actually. And my point to him was, if we want to have a conversation about Decatur, then I'm all for it. If we want to figure out how to lower unemployment in Decatur proper, I don't believe right to work is going to get that done. What I do think will get that done is bringing more vocational classes to Decatur Public Schools, making sure that there's job training for adults, like the group that was just in here a few minutes ago from Richland Community College, stop our divestment from school districts that have high poverty. All of those things, even one at a time, would have an effect on linking students that are coming out of high school with employable skills to employers that do exist in Decatur today. That, to me, STEM curriculum in Decatur Public Schools, that would go a long way for employers.
We have a natural place in the world, in the agribusiness world. It's not a square peg in a round hole. It exists. We have ADM, we have Tate & Lyle, we have the single largest independent John Deere dealer in the world, GSI. I mean, there's a list. If you see a Farm Progress show every other year, you know the kind of money we're talking about. Yet District 61 doesn't have an FFA program. Why are we not getting kids, particularly inner city kids, interested in agribusiness? Not farming. That's a very small percentage of the agribusiness side of it. I don't think you could take most kids out of District 61, drop them in the Farm Progress show, and they wouldn't even know that world. Yeah. Yet they're right in the heart of it.
I think you've just underscored the problem with our system today, our state system, not the system in Decatur, but our state system, and how the root of so many issues that are faced in Decatur or Pana or anywhere, Blue Mound, anywhere, start with failure of the legislature and past and present governors to advance the issue. Because that's a wonderful question. In a city in the state of Illinois that has so much potential and so much...
9,000 kids.
9,000 kids. Why can't we link those students to jobs of today and tomorrow directly in our public school system?
Do you think we let political correctness run amok in education for a long while? That you had to have a 4-year degree, you had to have a master's degree. There are $60,000 a year jobs driving trucks for ADM that never leave the city limits that they can't fill. There are trucks sitting in bays.
Or welders.
Or welders, or trades. And this is where I think that the trade unions have done, have tried to do a job of reaching out and pulling particularly minorities in. But a kid who can go to school or go to 2 years at Richland, come out with a trucking license and make $60,000 a year rather than going to the U of I spending $200,000 on an education so you can make $18,000 a year as a marketing person. Why did we get that backwards for so long?
Well, I think we have gotten it backwards. I think that if you look at the past history of how we fund schools, not to go back to this, but we need to, we've divested from vocational education, from career and tech readiness is what it's called in the state budget. Those are direct dollars that are no longer going to school districts like Decatur that arguably have an economy built on those types of jobs that are good paying jobs that are available today. But we have to do that linkage better, and we can't do it under the current construct, under the status quo, so it requires a change, which is tough to do. But I think you're right. I think we've gone through this process now for years and years, arguably decades, and we've now seen the effects of it in places like like Decatur and Peoria and Rockford and other places like that.
You're one of the reasonable guys when it comes to talking about working together and not putting blame. Is it fair to call all of these Rauner cuts, when this fiscal year anyway, that was a budget that was, passed by Democrats, knowing there wasn't enough money in there when the state tax expired, yet they're Rauner's cuts. Is that fair if I ask you that just as a human being, not as a Democrat?
I don't know. I didn't vote for it. I didn't vote for the budget.
No, but your party did.
Well, right, but I don't. I own my votes, and I'm accountable for my votes. I think it's a fair criticism that was acknowledged, by the way, when the budget bill was debated about this time last year, passed by Democrats, that there were gaping holes in it. That was part of the debate. It was acknowledged by the sponsor of the bills.
And why did you vote against it?
Because a couple of reasons. Number one, the education piece of it was just out of whack. It made inequity worse in the state. So why are we advancing a budget bill that spends billions of dollars that doesn't invest the money where it needs to be invested to get better outcomes? Not just to invest it to feel good, but to actually get a better outcome from public schools. Number two, I think there were problems with the Department of Corrections budget for multiple reasons, some of which the governor has articulated in his budget proposal that just weren't addressed. And I think that was a shortcoming. Number three, we just shouldn't be passing budgets that have gaping holes in them. That should not be a policy position of the legislature, whether you're an upstate or a downstate or Democrat or Republican.
I agree, but there's a lot of those people who voted for that budget who are now screaming because that budget's not fully funded, when they knew when they voted for it, it wasn't going to be fully funded.
And that's not to dismiss the difficult choices that were in front of the legislature last year in equal parts this year. I would say maybe even more difficult because the problem has grown to a degree. But I think the FY15 budget has been dealt with. There's still a few lingering programs that are important that there's still discussion about. I think our focus ought to be less on things that have happened last year or things that I don't think are productive, like right to work. And let's focus like a laser beam on the budget. Let's spend our money better. I think we can do that.
Are there any sacred cows in your mind as far as, every program can sell you their story. I can tell you funding that should go to Decatur. I think it should go there. But if the governor says we got to look at everything, it's hard to, it's somebody else's money when it goes there. It's what we want when it comes to us. Are there any sacred cows?
I don't, my answer to this has consistently been no. It's been no. I don't, and that upsets some people, but I acknowledge up front that I think the size and magnitude of the challenges we face with the budget are so large that we ought not enter the equation, whether that equation is a vote on a budget bill or a debate in a committee or a conversation about the budget with anything or with the assumption that there should be things not on the table. I think everything should be on the table. Now, there are some things that I will go to bat for until the bitter end, but part of the process is they have to show, these programs have to show that they spend money well and they have good outcomes. That's part of the process.
And that just seems to be common sense to most people who run a business or have employees. All right, do you think there'll be, final question, are we going to see more political battles? Is it going to get more amicable? Will the two sides be able to work across the aisle for some solutions? I think what I hear from listeners, Republicans and Democrats, is they want answers and they want solutions.
Yeah, I would hope so. Republican governor was elected by a pretty good margin last November. Voters of the state said, we want Bruce Rauner to be our governor. Voters of the state also elected Democrats in large majorities to the House and the Senate. That tells me that voters want divided government, which means that everybody has to walk in the door with an understanding that they're not going to get everything they want, which is tough to do. But I go back to November of 2014. Voters made a clear choice between who they elected governor and who they elected to the legislature, which means they want compromise, which is what we're going to have to do eventually.
It seems to be hard to find, whether it's Washington, D.C. or Springfield. And maybe it's always been that way, and I'm just getting older and more cynical, but it seems like it's more about playing the game now and getting reelected and doing, there's very little compromise. I mean, it's hard to imagine a day when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would sit down and have cocktails at the end of having this very public fight and battle, and I don't see that anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is done behind the scenes. It's not done publicly in a committee hearing, or it's not done it's not done in the media so much, but I see that behind the scenes all the time. I see that more actually this year than I did in my first 2 years in the Senate. I think that's good. By the way, that doesn't make me a bad Democrat or doesn't make Chapin Rose a bad Republican.
No.
But
it might to the party powers, but to the people, it makes you guys look like people who are willing to sit down and listen and not always agree, but find some middle ground where you can serve your districts.
And I think, in that particular instance, when he and I communicate, we don't agree on everything. We agree on a lot, we disagree on a lot, but when we communicate, I think that serves the districts we serve, in this case, Macon County, better. But we have to have more of that. That's a hard thing to do, but go back to November of 2014. Voters of the state said, this is how we want our state to be managed, and these are the people we want to manage it, which means that we want divided government, which means in order to function, we have to compromise.
Senator, we appreciate it.
Thank you.